It's a great pleasure to welcome three actors from the production. Jolie Abram, who plays Goneril, Eavan Gaffney, who plays Regan, and Emma Dargan-Reid, who plays Cordelia in the production. And I wonder if I could start by asking you individually to say a little bit about the character that you play in the play. So, who are these three women? What do we need to know about them? What do we find out about them in the play? I wonder, Julie, could I maybe start with you? Tell us a little bit about Goneril.
She is the eldest of the three, and I think, I think she has a lot of frustration with kind of her position of where she is. I think part of her probably thought she was owed this sovereignty a long time before. She's been a dutiful daughter. She's married who she was supposed to. And from the language that Lear exudes on her for the whole play, she's kind of put upon a lot. I think a lot of his own anger and rashness and rage is felt upon her quite often. I think that's how she's grown up. And so I think I kind of came to with this person who's has to have had a strong spine, but is constantly sort of suppressing all these emotions of her own sadness and fear and pain. And that kind of bleeds into her marriage with Albany, I think, for those reasons as well. I think she feels very lonely because she doesn't have a husband who, it seems, doesn't understand her. There's a separation. It's not quite the same relationship you could see with Regan and Cornwall. And I think it's so great how Shakespeare did that. So for those reasons, I think she's frustrated, she's lonely, and I believe she thinks she's owed a lot because she's done the right thing. She's done what she's supposed to do. Aren't I supposed to get something now? So whether that's resentment or bitterness or just, but I think it all swells from a place of real pain, and, she doesn't have kids. I've made my own choice about what that is, and there's pain there, and the fact that then Lear uses it against her in the play, I think really speaks to then how she continues on through the rest of the play. That was a choice I made. That's not necessarily in the text, but to me, how could you say that to your daughter? So to me, there's maybe some history there of childbirth or lack of, or troubles having one, so I think there's a lot of pain. That's where I'm really coming from with Goneril, because no one behaves that way out of just pure spite and wickedness. That's not, I don't believe that's a real thing. And for me, what's most important with Goneril was to make her a real person. She's just not acting wicked because she wants to be queen. She's doing it because this is what's supposed to happen, right? I got married like you told me to, and then I become queen, right? Why isn't this happening? I've have all this, anger and frustration because I thought I was going to be rewarded finally, and then you just took it from me in a way. So
Great, thanks, Julie. Emma, Cordelia?
Yeah, so Cordelia is the youngest of the three daughters and is seen as more the apple of Lear's eye, the favourite, his joy. But my approach to her, and also Roxana's approach to her in this version, was that they wanted to kind of bring out more of the kind of warrior, stronger side of her. The more pragmatic side, someone who is more about action speaks louder than words for her, who's very honest and virtuous, and which is what I really liked. I think it's in a lot of other interpretations and iterations of the play. It's, Cordelia is seen as this sort of, Christ-like sort of innocent figure, but it was nice how we tackled it this time, is to see her as a, someone of strength. And also, I think, especially in the beginning scene, as smart and as pragmatic as she is, she's also blinded, I think, by the love that she has for Lear and that Lear has for her, and, which I think causes her to misstep in her answer in that first scene. And then that has obviously dire consequences for her as she's banished. But, true to who she is and her actions, she comes back for him and fights for him and only him, and not for anything other than for the love that she has for her father, not for power or greed, much like the other characters are fighting for, just purely for the love that a child has for the father.
I think it's very interesting what you say about making her a strong figure, whereas traditionally in many productions she wouldn't have been presented in that way necessarily. And I wonder, is that reflected in your costuming as well? Do you think that you're not presented as a soft figure, I suppose, in the play?
Yeah, it was. Ty Green, who was our designer, came out with this sort of very practical suit almost, kind of like Cordelia has places to be, and she has a lot of, she has to move a lot, and which I thought was fantastic. And then giving her this sort of armor plate and a sword, which again I really loved. I love that they were interpreting her that way. So, and also I think with the theme, or like the sort of overall aesthetic of the play being sort of this pagan time period, we were told that women of that time were quite autonomous and were in positions of power and, held their own. So I think that was a lighter too with her aesthetic as well, which I really liked.
It's power dressing, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly
Isn't
right.
it, ultimately, yes. And Regan, the difficult middle child, perhaps, or I don't know.
I mean, that's a good place to start with her, I think. She's the second eldest. Yeah. She is the younger sister of Goneril, which I think is important because I think for a lot of the early part of the play, what you see with Regan is she's letting other people make their move first. And I think that's what happens when you're the middle child. You always speak second, or you make the second guess, so you get to see what the other person guesses first. So there's something kind of calculated or watchful about her in the early part of the play, I think. She's married to Cornwall, who's referred to as fiery and hot-tempered. That's the marriage she's in, but I think you kind of see in the play that it works, what they've got to a certain extent. Again, I think part of that is her ability to let somebody else stand in front and make the move for the early part of the play. I think what's really interesting about Regan is that she does go on a journey as the people who are standing in front of her sort of fall by the wayside one way or another, or, end up on opposite sides. You start to see her in later scenes be the leader, be the person making the decisions, and how well or not she does at that kind of unfamiliar position, I think is interesting.
I mean, I'm very struck actually by the fact that you both, as Goneril and Regan, you've got very clear senses in your mind of who these characters are. My experience in teaching the play is that students tend to confuse the two of them very readily, and they find it quite hard to tell them apart, And I wonder, are there particular things that you did individually or together to make it easier for you to separate out the two characters, one from the other?
I didn't really have... I guess when you're playing it, you get quite used... I felt like Regan took a lot of suggestion from Goneril in the beginning. It was Goneril making the let's have an alliance, and Regan saying, okay. Or, Goneril's the one who mentions plucking out the eyes. Then Regan's right there when it happens. So for me, it felt it's probably clearer in the playing of it because you know what you're saying and what you're doing, and it always felt quite different to me what Regan was saying and doing as opposed to Goneril. I don't know how you felt about that.
I mean, I think it's reading a play is so different from seeing it, and I think that's we're just different people. So how she's going to look at Regan is naturally just going to be different. So I think that just inherently, I think. By the medium, you're watching the play rather than reading it, because I think when I read it, it was kind of difficult because there's just so much language. It's so hard. There's so much poetic language too. And so I think when you're a student, whether high school or college, it's just like, all are these are the daughters who are against him, and so to be fair, I think it makes sense that you're kind of get confused by it. And there's a lot of letters. Who's writing who a letter?
Who's talking to who?
You know what I mean? So then you're like, wrote that letter? You know what I mean? So I just think, thank goodness, we're just very different people, but like have the same goal in mind. And I think, and even Roxana said a couple of times, she's like, it's great to see like you guys are very different women, but you're on, and I think it wasn't like we're like, how can we make them different?
No.
It's just kind of, she has her motives, I have mine, and I think it speaks to very much, though, the way Lear treats them very differently.
Yes. Yes.
So when you are treated so differently, you then behave very differently. So I think that had a lot to do with it too.
I mean, I was very struck by what you were saying, Jolie, about Goneril being the oldest of the three, and that having its own particular meaning as well. I think that comes across really beautifully in the production. In fact. The production comes with a very helpful little chart that maps out the relationships among the characters, which is very, very helpful, I think, particularly to anybody coming to the play for the first time, to see all the complicated arrows that join all of the dots and so on. Emma, could I come back to you a little bit about Cordelia? And Lear, obviously, in the play is a character who starts in one place and he ends up in a completely different place. So he starts in this position of great dominance and power and so on, and he ends in this position, I would say, of great tenderness, actually, at the end of the play. Cordelia, it feels to me, and I was struck by this watching your performance as well, that she's also a character who moves from one place to a very different place. And I think sometimes when people come to the play for the first time, a question they have is, well, why doesn't she just tell him what he wants to hear? He's an old man, he's her father, what's the big deal? And Cordelia can feel almost a little bit cold or unsympathetic, perhaps, in that opening scene. And then, of course, the character develops beyond that. But could you just maybe say a little bit about how that feels to make that arc as a character, as an actor?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting what you were saying about Lear's sort of journey from start to finish and how he's seen as this sort of pinnacle of power and strength, and then kind of the frailty and the decline happens as the play goes on. And I feel that maybe it's the opposite for Cordelia in a way. Like, I think she's seen in the beginning as, unsympathetic, not to her. I think, if anything, she is just someone who feels like this sort of language around love is very inadequate for her, and it feels like a betrayal to her. And she has an integrity, and so she won't play this game that he's set out to do with all of them, but rather just be honest. And but then there's also the argument that, is she being naive in this particular moment? Is she being blind to his temperament, thinking that, he could never react that way with her, like that's something that he would never do, but he does. And I think it's important to know that, like, while people question, like, well, why couldn't she have just been honest and, said what he wanted to hear? There's two people in this scenario that are the catalysts for these actions. I mean, it's Lear's reaction, don't forget. He could have easily have reacted very differently to how she responded to him. So I think rather than Cordelia being the one who's the main catalyst for the action, I think also Lear is too. And I think in terms of her journey, I think we see there's a clarity in her. There's a strength that comes through. There's more of a fight, I think. Especially in sort of the ending scenes when they're about to be taken off to prison. She has a bit more of a grit and a groundedness about her, about the reality of the situation, but still remains true to who she is. It's what I think anyway, and sort of what, in terms of mapping that journey, it's sort of what I found most prevalent. Yeah.
But it's always from a place of honesty, I suppose, in a way, isn't it? I mean, that is the point about the opening scene, I think, is the refusal to be dishonest, and a consistent refusal on her part to be dishonest, and a refusal to accept the idea that love can be measured, which is what Lear is asking of her.
Yeah, absolutely, or quantifiable or anything like that. It's a language of measurement, which is interesting.
Sure. I'm struck by the fact that we're sitting on the stage here today, and it is a relatively small stage. And one of the things that kind of struck me about the production, I would say, is you are also a small cast. So you don't have loads and loads of extras. Lear doesn't come on with his 100 knights. He actually doesn't come with any knights at all. So I wonder, does that make the play very much a play about a family, a domestic play, more than a kind of big national political play? And I wonder, does it feel that way to you, playing 3 siblings? So you are playing a family in it. Is that something that you feel within the production?
I feel like it kind of toggles between the two, in the sense that, like, quite often it's the conversation is a political one, and we're sort of, part of you is trying to remember, this is politics, this is kill or be killed, this isn't a democracy, and then the other side of it, as you're saying, is that you're related to everyone you're talking to. It's your sisters and their husbands, and a lot of the time what's coming through, especially in the later part of the play, is the personal squabble that gets in the way, especially with Regan and Goneril. As it goes on further and further, their interjections are less and less about France and more about Edmund. And yeah, I suppose in those moments it becomes much more a personal thing, a story about sisters and rivalry, than a story of who's going to lead the kingdom, which maybe is their downfall in the end. They take their eye off the ball in that way. I don't know.
Yeah. I've kind of always seen it more of as a family story, to be perfectly honest, than this political thing. And maybe that's just because I'm thinking of it through the sisters' eyes. Yeah. But yeah, I've never, I've seen a film of King Lear, so they had all those extras. Yeah. But it always still seems like a family drama full of tension and bitterness and spite. And, that's what it's always just symbolized to me personally. Yeah. So that's what I've always taken away from it. Yeah.
I mean, the comparison with film is a very interesting one, because films do tend to make it big rather than small, so you're not getting the more confined family drama aspect of it.
Well, because it's not just the blood family, it's also Kent and Gloucester. These were also his confidants, his loves, so and then Gloucester with his sons. So that's why it also is like, this is about family. These are about fathers and their children. That's why these parallel stories about fathers being blinded, do you know? Yeah. And then coming to understand, do you know? And then the downfall of the children because of that. So that's, I think.
It is a double family story, of course, exactly as you say. I wonder if I could just ask you a little bit about the language of the play as well. The students sometimes struggle a wee bit with the iambic pentameter. Is that something that you came to in some way, or is it a natural thing for you? How do you feel about the language?
I think it can be very useful in terms of understanding, because I think it works on an auditory level as well as read. This is what we're saying. It's so hard to read these plays and understand them off the page. It's so much easier to hear them, because a lot of the time Shakespeare is using things like alliteration and assonance to convey character or emotion. Like, I was struck early on with Regan about how many S sounds she has, especially in her opening speech. If when you break it down to sounds, she starts with a lot of m, and she says metal. And she basically says, I'm made of metal. And that's her opening line. So she says immediately who she is, and by the end of the speech, she's hissing like a snake. So you know everything you need to know about Regan. So I think I find taking clues, it makes it very useful. There's a lot of signposting in the language, but I think it helps if you say it out loud, because then you actually hear it. Reading it off the page, sometimes you are just seeing words you need to go and look up in a dictionary, which is a helpful thing to do. But an iambic pentameter, I think, is useful for actors, because it tells you where to end the phrase, or where to breathe, where the sense break is.
So it's almost like a guide to you.
Totally,
It tells you how to deliver itself.
Exactly. That's how I feel about it anyway. I don't know how you guys.
Well, yeah, and like you just said about Regan, it tells you so much about their characters and who they are. Cordelia's references to nature, the virtues of the earth, and references to hands and things like that, blessings, it just shows as much about who she is and what she believes in. And so I think it's looking at those words for me that kind of make those characteristics stand out and can help you kind of form and shape. So that was what I tend to look for, is those particular words that jump out at me that could tell you something.
I concur. They did a good job.
I concur.
I'm conscious of the fact that many of the people watching the video will be students who are getting ready to take an exam, possibly involving King Lear. So as with Conleth and Fiona, I wonder if I can ask you what advice you might have for them in terms to, how to approach the play, what to look out for in the play. What advice would you give to students?
I'd say read it out loud. That's helpful in understanding.
I'd say if they can get access to a performance of it online, even just to watch it, like you were saying about how listening to it out loud and just seeing the shape of it and how it moves, because that's another thing, like moving the text is just as important, and seeing how it comes to fruition is also really helpful. So I think if reading the text as well as if they can see it, I think that there are versions online you can watch.
Yes, I'm sure there are.
Yeah, I would recommend that as well.
Jolie, any particular advice?
No, I mean, that's,
You concur?
I concur. I concur. Yeah, no, I think,
I think it's wonderful advice to read the play out loud, in fact, isn't it? It gives you a completely different feel for it, and of course to see a production as well, and to come to this production if they haven't already seen it. Thank you all so much. It's been really great chatting to you, and what a wonderful production, and I'm sure many people will come and see it and enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.